Snow dusted the windows of the old house as if the world itself were holding its breath. In the living room, firelight flickered across faces that looked like family only in photos now. The grandchildren were half distracted by phones, the daughters whispered judgments behind wine glasses, and the sons-in-law loomed in doorways with practiced politeness. But all of them paused as Grandpa Walter cleared his throat. "This will be our last Christmas game," he said. His voice, once booming in classrooms and bedtime stories, had softened with time. But there was a clarity to it now that sliced through the hum of tension. "And the grand prize is everything I own." The silence was instant. Judith blinked. Susan's mouth fell slightly open. Robert raised an eyebrow. Emily, perched near the fireplace, simply watched him. It had always been tradition. Walter's Christmas game. Riddles tucked in kitchen drawers, puzzle boxes stashed behind books, scavenger hunts across the old three-story home. The winner would get something simple, a chess set, a rare coin, a letter tucked in a frame. But this year, the rules had changed. He stood slowly, hand gripping the mantle. The winner gets the house. The land. The savings. Everything. He didn't need to say why. They all knew. Eleanor was gone. The will was being discussed in shadows. And Walter had overheard enough late-night whispers to understand the game had started long before tonight. The daughters had drifted away in more ways than miles. Judith, the high-powered executive, spoke in boardroom tones even at the dinner table. Susan, the pious martyr, wore concern like armor. Their husbands, Robert and Mark, had already speculated what the property might fetch. Only Emily, the youngest grandchild, had stayed behind after college. Quietly. No expectations. Just helping him to the garden. Reading next to his chair. Asking questions about Eleanor. Walter had watched and waited. And tonight, he would begin. Each envelope bore a name. Each clue, a key. Judith's envelope sent her to the study, to face the thesis she never completed. Susan's clue led to Eleanor's music box, still wound tight with memories of lullabies and regret. Robert's puzzle unlocked the wine cellar, where the 1983 bottle he once stole sat, resealed with wax and warning. Mark's led to the church donation box he siphoned from, hidden in the attic eaves. Emily's. Her envelope was blank. She looked up at him. "What's this mean?" Walter smiled softly. "You'll know." The game had begun. But this year, the riddles would not only test intellect. They would ask for memory. Confrontation. Guilt. And only one would finish. Not by being clever. But by being honest. Because Walter had seen what they'd all become. And before he left this world, he was going to show them what it had cost. And who, if anyone, deserved what remained. Before the puzzles. Before the silence. Before the rift, there had been Christmases full of music. Eleanor played the piano, humming along to carols as Walter stirred cider. The girls, Judith and Susan, wore matching red flannel pajamas and competed to solve Walter's riddles first. Emily hadn't even been born then. Those years had glowed with warmth, untouched by ambition or guilt. Walter had been a high school literature teacher. Quietly respected. He had a reputation for creating lessons that made students feel seen, not tested. At home, he wrote riddles and bound them in leather notebooks. Puzzles weren't just games to him. They were invitations to look deeper. Eleanor had been the emotional compass. Gentle, patient. The sort of woman who remembered birthdays of people she hadn't spoken to in years. When she died, 2 winters ago, it was as if the air inside the house thinned. After her funeral, the family started to fracture in sharper lines. Judith called a week later, but only to ask about the legal documents. Susan came over once, with Tupperware of soup she didn't cook herself. Robert brought up estate taxes during the wake. Mark asked if Walter was safe living alone. It wasn't anger that formed in Walter's chest, it was clarity. He began watching. Listening. The whispers weren't hard to catch, especially when they assumed he napped in the sunroom or kept his hearing aids low. He heard them calculating. The land alone is worth $500,000. If we get him into assisted living by spring, Judith's name should be on the deed. It's cleaner legally. Even Emily, who stayed longer than the others, started to fade into silence around certain subjects. Walter noticed. But he didn't ask. Instead, he visited Eleanor's grave and whispered things he wouldn't say aloud. I'm not ready to leave this house. Not to them. They forgot what it means to be family. I need them to see it. To really see it. That spring, he began writing. The riddles were more than games now. Each one was a test, threaded with truth, memory, and consequence. He took photographs from old albums and annotated them with hidden messages. He opened Eleanor's recipe books and penciled cryptic verses in the margins. He folded old report cards, love letters, and broken ornaments into puzzles. He wasn't just building a treasure hunt. He was building a mirror. A final lesson, from a teacher who'd spent a lifetime watching people discover who they really were, once the answers got difficult. And this time, the reward wasn't gold or medals. It was everything he had left. On the first morning, Judith stood in the doorway to the study, arms crossed. She stared at the dusty shelf where her unfinished thesis sat, bound in a cracked navy binder, pages yellowed at the edges. She hadn't looked at it in 25 years. I don't see what this has to do with anything, she muttered. But a note lay on the desk, written in Walter's steady hand. You stopped believing in your own voice. When you traded courage for comfort, you started disappearing. She shoved it into her purse. In the hallway, Susan sobbed quietly after opening the music box. The melody, Eleanor's favorite lullaby, still played clear and soft. Inside was a letter addressed in Eleanor's handwriting, to the daughter who needed faith to feel superior. Robert returned from the cellar pale. The stolen wine, recorked and preserved, sat next to an invoice Walter had somehow kept. Robert read the attached note aloud later that night, with bitterness. You said you borrowed it for a client. You drank it in the hotel. I called the concierge. He remembers. Mark, silent as always, never admitted what his envelope revealed. But when Susan tried to ask, he snapped, Don't. Emily's blank envelope remained in her coat pocket. She helped Walter to bed each night, saying little, but observing much. Each day brought new layers. Old letters appeared. Bank statements. Photos with missing figures scrawled in the margins. Where were you? Susan accused Judith of planting things. Judith fired back that Susan always played victim. Robert started calling lawyers. Mark walked the woods behind the property for hours, returning with red eyes and silence. Walter didn't intervene. But he watched. Every night from his chair in the living room, pretending to nap. On the fourth day, Emily found a photo tucked behind a drawer. It was her and Eleanor, baking cookies. A note on the back read, You remembered joy. She didn't know what it meant. But she kept it. That evening, Susan stormed out. The next morning, Mark was gone. Judith tried to rally Robert. We're the only ones playing seriously. Robert didn't respond. He was still shaken by a phone call he'd made in the dead of night, to a friend who confirmed everything Walter had left for him to find. Emily stayed. Quietly. She watered Eleanor's plants. She made tea. When Judith accused her of manipulation, Emily only said, I'm not trying to win anything. But she was the only one still solving puzzles. And Walter? He smiled from his chair. Because the game was doing exactly what it was meant to do. Pull back the mask. Reveal the fault lines. Show what was buried. And who still carried love instead of entitlement. By the 6th day, the house was almost silent. No more shouting in the hallways. No more debates in the kitchen. Just the wind scraping against the windows and the soft hum of the heater kicking in. Judith had retreated to the guest room. She spent most of the day reading Eleanor's journals, the ones Emily had placed back on the shelf after finding them behind the linen closet. Pages filled with quiet pain and disappointment, always scribbled in Eleanor's careful hand. I miss when Judith laughed without needing to be right. I miss when Susan asked me what made me happy. Susan hadn't returned. Her suitcase was still in the hallway, half-zipped, as though she might come back for it. Mark never called. His absence felt like a closing door. Robert packed in the early morning and left without a word. Judith didn't try to stop him. Emily moved through the house like it was a living thing, straightening the photographs, lighting a fire in the den, carrying trays of tea to Walter who barely spoke now. He watched her closely, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. The final clue arrived tucked into the family Bible, an innocuous envelope sealed with wax. Emily found it when reaching for a blanket in the parlor. It had no riddle. No instructions. Only a folded letter. To the one who stayed. You never needed to prove anything. You just showed up. That was always the answer. This is not a reward. It's a continuation. Take care of this place. Not the house, the story. Don't let it disappear. Walter. She cried for the first time. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, stunned unraveling as she sat beside the fireplace, the letter shaking in her hands. She hadn't known she was holding so much inside. All the unspoken years. All the losses that had chipped away at the girl she used to be. Walter reached for her hand that evening, his skin like parchment, his grip still steady. I never stopped seeing you, he said. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Upstairs, Judith packed her bag. She left a note on the kitchen table. I was wrong. He knew. I don't deserve any of this. She took the early train. That night, Emily sat at the piano bench. She hadn't played in years. Her fingers found the melody Eleanor used to hum. Soft and hesitant at first, then stronger as the fire crackled nearby. Walter watched from the archway, wrapped in a blanket Eleanor had knitted decades ago. He closed his eyes. And listened. Not to the music. But to the sound of home returning. The morning after Judith left, Emily brewed coffee just as Walter liked it, black, with a dash of cinnamon. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly, and the silence left behind by absence felt both clean and infinite. She placed the mug beside him. He was awake, watching snow swirl beyond the window. I'm ready, he said. For what? For the last step. Emily didn't ask what he meant. She simply nodded. Walter motioned to the drawer by his chair. Inside was a small tin box, battered from years of use. She opened it to find one final envelope. No name. Just the word, truth. Emily opened it slowly. Inside was a deed to the house, signed and notarized, dated 3 months earlier. Alongside it, a handwritten letter. Emily. You were never playing the game. You were living it. You didn't need clues to prove you cared. You didn't need keys to open what was already unlocked. The others, maybe they loved the house. But you loved what made it home. This is yours now. Because it always was. Love. Grandpa. Emily sat there, hands trembling. Why didn't you just tell me? Walter exhaled, long and slow. Because I needed them to see. And I needed you to believe. She didn't cry this time. She simply reached for his hand, warm now from the mug, and held it. That evening, she walked through the house, room by room. Touched every memory with a kind of reverence. The banister still carried scratches from Judith's teenage rebellion. The windows bore faint traces of tape from Susan's childhood paper snowflakes. Eleanor's apron still hung by the pantry. None of it was perfect. But it was honest. She stopped at the fireplace, where the final photo now rested, Walter and Eleanor, arms linked, smiles real. No masks. No poses. That night, Walter slept deeply. And Emily didn't dream. The decision was made. Without fanfare. Without speeches. Not to hold on. But to begin again. Not with anger. But with clarity. The new year arrived quietly. No countdown. No party hats. Just a light dusting of snow on the windowsill and the house, breathing softly with its new keeper. Emily made no announcements. She simply changed the locks. When the lawyer called a week later to confirm the transfer of assets, she responded with a simple, "Yes, I'm ready." The documents had been prepared long ago, Walter's signature neatly affixed beside the notary's seal. All that remained was her quiet consent. The bank accounts shifted. The deed updated. The trust sealed under her name. Then the silence became restful. The others called, eventually. First Susan, her voice laced with performative remorse. "I've been praying," she said. "I think we all lost our way." Emily said, "Thank you, and nothing else." Next came Robert. "There's confusion about the estate, are you sure everything was finalized? Maybe we should have a family meeting." She replied, "I'm sure," and hung up. Judith's message came in a curt email, "We need to talk about what you've done." Emily didn't respond. They arrived unannounced one afternoon, Judith and Robert, bundled in designer coats, stepping through the gate as if they still had keys. Emily met them on the porch. "This isn't yours to keep," Judith snapped. "You manipulated him. He was old. Tired. You took advantage." Emily didn't raise her voice. "You played the game. You just didn't understand it." "We deserve part of it," Robert added. Emily looked at him. "You deserve the truth. And you got it." She stepped inside and closed the door. The locks clicked. They shouted through the door. Emily lit a candle. They pounded on the frame. She turned on Eleanor's favorite record. Eventually, they left. No letters followed. Just silence. Walter had said the house needed to be kept, not owned. That meant filling it with meaning, not noise. So Emily did exactly that. She donated boxes of untouched clothes, duplicate china sets, trinkets bought out of guilt. She sold Judith's forgotten art collection and gave the proceeds to a literacy foundation. She restored Eleanor's garden with native herbs and labeled each plant with handwritten tags. And each corner of the home began to hum again. Not with music. But with peace earned by patience. Walter's final game had ended. But Emily's quiet stewardship had just begun. And with each passing week, the house became lighter. Not emptier. Lighter. It began with whispers. First in the family circles. Then in the community. Then in places where legacy once offered protection. Judith's name was removed from the board of a prestigious nonprofit, quietly, but deliberately. Conflicts of integrity, they said. Her donation receipts came under review. Her firm, once founded on reputation, lost 2 high-profile clients in as many months. She tried to reframe the narrative. Claimed Emily manipulated an ailing man. But too many people had seen the footage Walter left, brief clips of each family member reading their clues aloud, revealing their own secrets. A thumb drive had been sent to the lawyer. Emily never watched it. She didn't need to. Susan's congregation offered prayers, and then distance. Her once weekly speaking roles diminished to hallway greetings and empty platitudes. A younger member quietly replaced her in the outreach program she once led. Whispers of hypocrisy tend to echo louder in pews. Mark didn't return. A friend mentioned he was living in a trailer near the county line. No one followed up. Robert took the fallout hardest. His firm flagged several tax discrepancies linked to old accounts. Nothing illegal, but enough to raise eyebrows. He resigned before the review concluded, citing personal matters. Emily stayed quiet. She received no pleasure in their unraveling. But she did feel a certain steadiness, a reaffirmation that silence and patience sometimes strike deeper than rage. She opened the house each Sunday to children from the local library's reading program. She hosted garden classes in spring. The laughter of strangers slowly replaced the arguments of relatives. One afternoon in May, a man in a wrinkled coat stood at her gate. Lucas. Judith's son. Once estranged. Now clean-shaven, quieter. Can I see the place? Emily nodded. He walked through the rooms reverently. Said little. At the piano, he touched the keys but didn't play. She never really knew how to love, he said finally, staring out the bay window. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. He left with a nod. The next morning, a handwritten thank you note lay folded on the porch. It was the first letter she'd received from a family member that year. She tucked it between the pages of Walter's last puzzle journal. Where it belonged. It was August when Judith returned. The garden was in full bloom, lavender, sage, lemon balm, each labeled with care. The air smelled like peace. Emily heard the gravel crunch under polished heels. She stepped onto the porch as Judith approached, holding herself like a woman used to having the upper hand, even when it was slipping through her fingers. I'm not here to argue, Judith said. I know, Emily replied. They sat on the bench under the old maple. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, whispering like it always had when Eleanor dozed there on summer afternoons. I was cruel, Judith admitted. To him. To you. To this house. Emily waited. Judith pulled something from her purse, a worn envelope, once white, now yellowed by time. He gave this to me. Before the game started. Said to open it when I felt lost. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, one line. Remember who you were when you weren't trying to win. Judith swallowed. I don't know who that person is anymore. Emily looked out at the garden. She's still there. Just buried under the noise. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just honest. Judith stood. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't need an apology, Emily said. But you do. Judith blinked. From who? Emily met her gaze. From yourself. For a moment, something softened in Judith's face. Then she nodded, stepped down the path, and walked toward her car. Halfway to the gate, she paused. Do you think he knew it would end like this? Emily smiled. He hoped it would begin like this. Judith didn't reply. She opened the gate. And didn't close it behind her. Emily watched her go, then returned to the house. To the light. To the quiet. To the home that asked nothing, except to be honored. Autumn came gently. Emily painted the window frames. Repaired a creaking stair. Hung a new wind chime outside Eleanor's sewing room window, its soft notes whispering through the house like memory made sound. The air inside was no longer heavy. It had shifted. As if the walls, too, had exhaled. Neighbors began stopping by again. Some to return casserole dishes that had gone dusty in the attic. Others just to see if the garden was really as beautiful as the rumor said. It was. Children laughed on the porch during storytelling afternoons. Strangers brought seedlings and left with pie recipes. The old house, once tense with secrets, breathed laughter again. Emily never put up a sign. But everyone knew the house was open. She started writing in the mornings, Walter's puzzled journals beside her, a fresh notebook beneath her hand. She didn't try to be profound. She just wrote what she saw, what she felt, what she remembered. Some mornings, she sat in Eleanor's rocking chair, sipping tea and watching fog rise from the field beyond the garden. Other days, she walked the creek trail with a thermos, her boots crunching leaves. Grief still visited. Quietly. But it no longer sat at the table. One evening, she found a tiny envelope under the piano lid. A final surprise Walter had left. Inside was a single slip of paper. Home isn't a place. It's the part of you that never stops growing. She placed it in a frame beside the fireplace. When Christmas came, she didn't host a game. She left one puzzle. Just one. Folded inside an ornament, hanging at eye level. A child visiting with her grandmother found it and brought it to Emily. "Is this for someone?" Emily smiled. "Yes. It's for anyone." She watched them read it together. Then hung the ornament back. Some things, she had learned, didn't need to be won. They only needed to be found. And so the house stood, quiet, breathing, remembered. It no longer belonged to a man or a will or a game. It belonged to a story. The wind in the chimney, the creak of the stairs, the laughter of children, it all wrote chapters. And Emily, with her notebook, her tea, and her silence, let it happen. Because some endings aren't grand. They are soft. Like a puzzle finally solved. Like a truth finally spoken. Like a love that, once quiet, never left. Each year, the ornament remains. And each year, someone finds it. Not to win. But to understand.